consecutive governments who have privatised and sold off probably all of the country's assets. Oil and gas is, I've worked in the Norwegian sector of the North Sea, and I'm a Norwegian taxpayer. Norway is it's a good model to be based on. But what I would ask the Speaker is, because we're an oil and a gas producing nation, but none of the oil and gas that comes from the North Sea belongs to the UK. It's all, we take the revenue, but it's foreign companies, foreign oil companies, that all the rights were sold to, both by the Thatcher and the following Labour governments. Would a new Scotland have, like Statoil is the Norwegian, they have managed their assets far better than anything that the UK has ever managed to do. These benefits that we have in the North Sea, are those benefits going to be for the Scottish people? Are we going to have a national oil company instead of selling everything off to privatisation?
Okay, so we've got a question on oil and gas. Looking for a second question. Anyone just in the middle there, James?
The Westminster government has already said it would refuse the pound as a currency, with the Bank of England as a lender of last resort, to an independent Scotland. But given that the Fiscal Commission has produced, I think, plans A, B, C and D, I don't really understand why the First Minister refuses to say what plan B is. Because I think that's putting a lot of people off.
Okay, question comes in.
Oil and gas. Today the Norwegian government announced that their sovereign wealth fund, because they have built up a fund with their oil and gas revenues since the mid-1990s, has reached £502 billion. £502 billion. The Scottish Oil Fund, set up by the UK government, has zero, because of course it wasn't set up. We've blown all our oil and gas revenues since the mid-70s, and never set up a fund in the 1990s like North Norway did, who discovered oil at the same time as Scotland back in the early 70s. So they have managed their assets for future generations. Every Norwegian's a kroner millionaire now. They have created a situation where their oil will never run out, because even though the actual physical oil runs out the ground, they're going to have this fund available forever. They own more than 1%, I think now, of global shares in all the private companies. We could have done that. Even the UK politicians, who are all retired now, David Steele, Dennis Healy, they've all said we made a really big strategic mistake by not setting up an oil fund in the UK. So we'll have the opportunity to not repeat those mistakes and set up our own oil fund, and certainly the white paper is committed to doing that. But the question was, will we benefit? Well, yes, we will benefit, because even though much of our oil and gas is owned by multinationals, and that will not change overnight with independence, we have to give stability. I can't talk about the long-term future, but clearly there's no point suggesting that's going to change. But the revenues will accrue to the Scottish Treasury. 90% of the oil and 50% of the gas are in Scottish waters. Scottish waters are determined by the convention, the International Convention on the Law of the Sea, and that is internationally agreed boundaries overseas, and therefore we know what falls within that. And Professor Alec Kemp, who is Europe's foremost oil and gas economist from the University of Aberdeen, has published his paper outlining what would belong to Scotland. They reckon there's £1.53 trillion left in the North Sea. £1.5 trillion. For every barrel that's been taken out, there's one left, and the one that's left is worth a lot more than the barrel that's been taken out. So that's a massive asset for Scotland. We have to use it wisely, and we have to make sure we've got a good, vibrant oil and gas offshore sector in Scotland. We've got a lot of people in Moray who are employed in that sector. We want them to continue to have their jobs. Of course we do, and want to support it. And we've also said we move the Energy Department up to the north east of Scotland with independence as well, because that's where it belongs. and of course there's many energy jobs in London who run the offshore industry. They'd be transferred up to Scotland as well, so there'd be an economic gain there as well. So it's a massive opportunity, and the answer is yes, we will get 100% of the benefits. Perhaps Norway will be ahead of us. It might take a long time to build up £500 billion in an oil fund, but at least we can make a start and not repeat past mistakes.
Thank you. On to the question of sterling. The person who said that a shared currency was logical was Alistair Darling, who I think plays a role in the anti-independence campaign, but now he says it's not such a good idea. Let's try and game, going back to the previous gentleman's questions about how do negotiations work. Well, anybody in the room who has done negotiations know, firstly, understand what is in everybody's interests. That's the first thing. Do we really believe that our friends and neighbours, and that's what they are, our friends and neighbours in England are going to cut off their nose to spite their face when the most logical thing for business in the rest of the United Kingdom, as it is in Scotland, is that we do not have transaction costs in our single market? So that's the first thing. Is it in the interest, let's ask ourselves that, is it in the interests of elsewhere in the United Kingdom to have a shared currency? To which the answer is yes, of course it is. For many reasons, but here's one. Scotland is the second biggest market for the rest of the United Kingdom in the world. £60 billion worth of trade a year. So if, because people wanted to cut off their nose to spite their face, would then force and add £500 million worth of transaction costs onto businesses in England. For that reason, it's daft. It's not in the interests of the rest of the United Kingdom. Are there other options? Yes, there are. But as I tried to explain at the beginning, the job of the Scottish Government is to put forward the preferred position of the Scottish Government. There are others who argue in favour of sterlingisation. It's a fancy word for you can just continue using the currency, and nobody can stop you. It's an international tradable currency. So nobody can stop us using the pound. Fact. But is there a better way of doing it? Yeah, it's better by having a formal agreement with the rest of the UK. There are other political parties who might wish Scotland to have its own currency. That is not our position and the position in the white paper. But when Scotland is sovereign, and down the road, if people want to do something else, they can do that. We'll have the power to do that. In my view, in this interdependent world, I think it makes sense to continue sharing some things. And I think the currency is a very good example of being able to do that. But the most important thing is understanding people's interests. We also need to understand people's political motivations. And I think it's largely transparent, and all the polling has showed it, that what we have seen from the Westminster parties, the bullying tactics of we're not doing this and we're not doing that, incidentally from a government that said that they weren't going to pre-negotiate before the referendum, they then did that. That's politics. It's exactly the same as when William Hague said before 1997 that a yes vote for devolution will put taxes up, business will leave, and it will be a disaster for Scotland. He was wrong about that, and they're wrong about that politically as well now. Let's understand what the political and economic interests are, and it's in all of our interests that we have a shared currency.
Okay, so looking for some questions again. We've got two on this side here, so gentleman just in the middle. We'll try and keep it as concise as we can.
Thank you, Chairman. I think both Richard and Angus know me well enough that they expect I'm going to vote no. Well, I can tell you I'm not going to make up my mind until probably about the end of August. So you don't know how I'm going to vote. And in fact, I might not make up my mind until then, because I think in some ways I could be a win both ways. If you win, I'll get rid of Trident, which I very much want. On the other hand, if the other lot, and I'll get rid of the Tory party in England. On the other hand, if the other lot win, I'll feel more secure and my pension will be more secure. But my question is going to be this. Recent polls have shown that 25% of the people in Britain and in Scotland would accept the removal of the monarchy. And they believe the reason for this is that Prince Charles has become steadily less popular and less popular since the death of his former wife Diana. So my question to you, gentlemen, is why doesn't the Yes campaign say that Scotland will become a republic if they win? And I put it to you, because of the polling, you might actually win more votes over than you lose.
Okay. Question about monarchy. Show of hands again, sorry, just for questions. Gentleman just in the middle there with a pale shirt.
One thing that I feel is quite popular with people on the no side is the fact that the SNP quote figures and quote the negotiation, which we're not going to have any say on. We're going to vote yes or no in September. We all know this. And then there's going to be an 18 months position that we, the people, are not going to have any negotiation in. Mr. Lochead mentioned the oil fund, etc. We're going to have, I can't remember, $1.53 trillion, etc., etc. 2 points, if it's okay. The last 10 years, year on year, UK oil production has dropped for the last 10 years. It's now, Brent crude is now struggling to meet the criteria that it needs to meet to carry the price of oil. The SNP, the Tory party, nobody in the UK has any control on this. So how can you actually stand up there and say, we're going to have this amount of money? Over 70% of oil now in Europe is produced and taken from Russia, or the former CIS, which is a place that I work in. That leads on to my next question. That's my first question. The next question is remotely tied. I'm a full UK taxpayer, but the UK government has a 100% reciprocal tax agreement with the country I work in. I work 4 weeks on, 4 weeks off. How is that going to change? What's the proposed Scottish government, how are they going to deal with that? I get paid net, so my foreign tax credit I get is towards my UK liability. I say towards my UK liability, I still have to pay myself some. What's going to happen for me and many guys from this area that work overseas, and I'm lucky enough to have a 100% tax reciprocal agreement.
Okay, so questions on oil again and the tax on that. Okay.
Can I just kick off with the oil and gas question? Oil and Gas UK, not me, not the Scottish Government, not politicians, the industry's representative body, announced that last year's investment in the North Sea sector in new infrastructure was £14 billion. They've just announced that this year, 2014, the figure is likely to be a further £13 billion. So that's £27 billion over 2 years of investment by the oil companies in the future of the North Sea. That is record investment in terms of 14 billion last year. Clearly 13 billion is 1 billion less.
Last year they drilled approximately 17 wells in the North Sea, and the year before they did 55 million.
Fine.
55.
I'm telling you, oil and gas's UK figures, which is they're stepping up investment in the North Sea. You're quite right, there was a dip over the last few years, and you're quite right about the figures for the barrels of oil taken out, despite the fact it's still left a £12.6 billion surplus over the last 5 years going to Westminster from Scotland. But that is enormous investment, enormous. That is a fact, £27 billion investment over 2 years in the future of the North Sea, the future. And that in turn will mean that the North Sea sector is going to be extremely active. The value of the £1.5 trillion, again, are estimates from the likes of Professor Alec Kemp. They're not SNP politicians or Yes campaigners trying to persuade people there's some sort of milk and honey around the corner, let's all vote yes. This is the situation. In the 1980s, Margaret Thatcher said oil would peak back then. So there's a big future for the oil and gas sector. And in terms of your tax, if I can just address that point as well, the White Paper outlines, in terms of the government's proposal for the transition from the status quo to independence over the 18 months, that the taxes will be continuity. For the negotiations, we ain't going to have the capacity or the inclination to design new taxation systems. We're going to have to continue the existing arrangements. So the arrangements you have, your tax arrangements for working in a third country, will continue under the tax regime for an independent Scotland. The difference, of course, is that thereafter, a Scotland with tax powers can change that if they felt, and people stood manifestos for different tax systems and were elected. So please be assured that there'll be continuity for tax arrangements through the 18 months and for the first independent Scottish Parliament, unless people vote for parties who've got different policies. And my point just with investment in infrastructure in the North Sea is that is enormous. Last year's investment was a record of 14 billion. To me, that's a sign of confidence in the future of the North Sea. Therefore, the figures in terms of future revenues seem quite credible to me. I never said that we'd be able to create an oil fund of £500 billion like the Norwegians, because they started in the mid-1990s. I'm just saying that in the future we'll have the opportunity to set up an oil fund to protect the interests of future generations.
I agree. My point is, though, that the SNP quote figures of X amount of trillion dollars. You've no control over that whatsoever. The former CIS, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Azerbaijan, etc., are pumping out more oil than they can shake a stick at. And eventually, Europe's buying it now because it's actually cheaper and better quality. Brent crude is now struggling to make the criteria it needs to make. So that's what controls OPEC. So OPEC are going to lose revenue. Once OPEC and the Arabs start losing the revenue, they're going to open the taps. So your investment that you're talking about, which is massive, is going to disappear because Scots oil is so expensive to take out of the ground. In comparison to all these countries, because the EU is now becoming bigger, and all these countries want Azerbaijan, it held the Eurovision Song Contest. It's not even in the EU. And you see my point? You can't.
I do see your point.
But the SNP won't back up the figures. You stand up here and say,
they're not my figures. Firstly, they're not the SNP's figures. Every figure I've mentioned is not the SNP's figures.
The SNP is saying it. Nicola Sturgeon said it so many times.
They're not Nicola Sturgeon's figures. They're independent figures from the oil industry itself, and also from Professor Alec Kemp. But I do agree with you. Of course, we can't predict what the oil price is going to be in several years. All we can do is, with the existing evidence we have, is make projections that other people are making. That applies exactly the same to the UK. The UK's projections for oil income is exactly the same. So every country in the world isn't exactly the same. There's always a bit of uncertainty. It applies whether we're independent, it applies whether we're still part of the UK. Of course, it's uncertainty. But the oil industry know a lot more about this than I do. They employ their very well paid economists to project demand for oil in the next few decades, and that dictates their investment, and it goes to the boardroom of their £14 billion last year, their £13 billion this year. As you know a lot more, I'm sure, than I do, but if you work in the industry, the oil industry boards put a lot of thought and spend a lot of money getting the best advice before they commit to spending that huge amount of money investing in the future of the North Sea.
Just one quick postscript on oil. There's been one constant since oil was discovered in the North Sea, which is those that have opposed Scottish independence have told us from the start it's running out and it's a problem for us. It's not a problem for us. We have a tremendous resource, but the case for independence is not predicated on oil.
I agree.
It's not predicated on oil. Should we be cautious? Should we be careful? Absolutely. It's still an incredibly valuable resource, and I don't think anybody is suggesting that the oil price is going to go down. Yes, it goes up and down, but the trend is relentlessly up. First point. Second point, we are really lucky that we've won on the natural lottery twice. So we're currently the biggest oil producer within the European Union. Again, not an SNP fact, a fact. Secondly, we're 1% of Europe's population, but have 25% of Europe's renewable potential. Now, I'm not talking about onshore, I'm talking about offshore. And we need to get that right, and we need to think clever about how we get that resource into a savings fund for the future. So it's not about being predicated on one energy source, but you're right that we need to be on top of all of the numbers. Can I answer the question about the monarchy? And it's kind of the same question that I answered to the gentleman here about Europe. People have different views on a whole series of subjects, and independence doesn't mean it's always going to be the same party in control, pursuing the same agenda all the time. You will determine who that is. And you're well known as somebody who has stood for Liberal Democrats, and I'm delighted there are people with other party political views who are thinking strongly about voting yes. Are there people within the Yes campaign who are avowed Republicans? Yes, there are. But what the Scottish Government will negotiate is for the continuing head of state arrangements to be the current monarch and our successors. If people want to change that, and this goes the same with Europe, if you want to, the power will be in your hands to elect a party that is in favour of that. And if it's as successful as you believe it is, perhaps you should run for that on your own manifesto once we've won the referendum. But we need to get a yes result first.
The question was, would you get more votes if you went for that?
I don't think so is the honest answer. I don't think so. But there is a constituency, and it's across the party boundaries, which is Republican. Yes, it is. But what we are trying to explain in terms of the process is a proposal for what would be negotiated with the UK government. Her Majesty is the head of state of a whole series of countries, from Canada to New Zealand to Australia, and some countries have debated whether they want to move on from that. Australia did recently and decided that they want to retain the current arrangements. In time, perhaps others might seek to change them. I'm happy with the current arrangements, and I think Her Majesty the Queen will make an excellent Queen of an independent Scotland. She does an excellent job as the head of state for other countries in the Commonwealth too. I think it's part of the social union arrangements that most people value.
Okay, just to let you all know as well, our panel will be hanging around at the end of tonight to allow you to have a one-to-one. So if you do have discussions that you'd like to take in depth a little bit further, then there will be the opportunity for that. Okay, so can we have a show of hands again for a couple of questions? Just the gentleman right to you.
Earlier on this week, the Church of Scotland published an information on consultations that had been held throughout Scotland to determine what the people would regard as important for Scotland's future.
Yeah.
Economics was a way down the list. At the top of the list were things like honesty, integrity, truthfulness, a caring society, education. The Westminster Parliament that we have just now is highly confrontational. It's what's called, I think, a male or a masculine parliament. Whereas the Northern Europeans that you're speaking of, the Scandinavian countries, are more consensual, regarded as a female type of parliament. We see in Edinburgh, I would suggest, a move towards a masculine, confrontational parliament, where big names, big personalities throw sound bites and insults at each other rather than answering the questions in depth. How do we match the aspirations that were so clearly put in a new independent Scotland, and how can we achieve this consensual parliament?
Okay, and show of hands again. Gentleman right at the back there.
No females, come on.
No ladies asking questions. We'll see if we can get some ladies around next time.
It was just a question more to do before the referendum. I was wondering what the Yes campaign would do to involve more young people, because I'm a young person and I look around and there's not many young people here, and I just feel that a bit more should be done by both sides.
I think there's a few people who would argue they are young at heart here. I'll pass over to our panel.
I've been asked to answer the question about the Scottish Parliament, no doubt because I'm an MSP. Firstly, can I just say how valuable the Church of Scotland's contribution was to the debate this week? Valuable for a number of reasons. I thought the points they made were spot on, and you've just eloquently reiterated what they were. And also because we need Civic Scotland. This must not be a debate with politicians. There are politicians, of course, at the top table. We're outnumbered by the non-politicians across the Yes campaign in Moray, speaking at all the meetings. The reason why we're here is to try and answer questions. And that's why, because of the white paper and the questions you're asking are very relevant to the activities of Parliament and the governments. But it's really important that Civic Scotland speaks up and is speaking up. And there's some fantastic events taking place right across Scotland. And I hope Civic Moray organise events as well. And if anyone here from Civic Moray, please organise your own events. And there have been some events already. Clearly this is a proactive event organised by Yes Moray, but if Civic Moray can organise events, that will be even better, and have yes and have no speaking. independence about what sort of society we can create. And one of the best parts of the debate taking place just now, not necessarily head-to-head you see in television and those debates that are attracting some negative headlines in the press quite rightly, but some of the real debates that are taking place across the whole of Moray and Scotland are about what kind of society we want to live in. And the Church of Scotland's contribution, I think, contributes towards that. Can I just say that the Scottish Parliament is not Westminster? I'll just be a wee bit defensive as an MSP here. We are not like Westminster. At the moment, of course, we're in the middle of a heated referendum campaign, therefore we will see heated debates in the Scottish Parliament. And we always want a bit of passion and a bit of heat in our politicians and our political debates, because that inspires and also is about argument, and that's how you get the best decisions sometimes. But the same-sex marriage debate that took place in the Scottish Parliament, the debates over the Iraq War that took place in the Scottish Parliament, were widely praised by all sections of society in terms of the way they were carried out with dignity and respect and mutual respect between both sides. The Parliament was at its best, and there's many debates that take place in the Scottish Parliament like that. And the adversarial pictures you see of Westminster, maybe Angus, as a Westminster MP, not picking you, Angus, but he might have more to say about that. But we don't see as much of that in the Scottish Parliament, and I hope post-independence, when we're having a lot more reflection on the type of society and type of democracy we want to have in this country, that will be even more to the fore, that kind of approach to politics. And it's really important that politics doesn't just happen in the Scottish Parliament, it happens throughout the whole of society, and as I said before, throughout the whole of civic Scotland as well. I think that will happen. I still think it happens a lot more than what it does in Westminster just now, but it will happen a lot more in the future.
Political culture. Just because things are sparky when there's more emotion, whether at Westminster or in the Scottish Parliament, that's what you end up seeing in the news. What you don't see in the news, and even to be fair to some of my colleagues in Westminster, some of the most important work happens in committees, and we spend a lot of time doing all that kind of stuff, and it's not confrontational in the way that Prime Minister's questions or First Minister's questions often is. Can we always work on improving our political culture? Absolutely. Just by changing the rules in the way that one set up the Scottish Parliament, I think people hoped a number of things. There'd be more elected women, because it's atrocious, the rate of elected women in UK politics, and it has improved, but there's still a long way to go. In terms of political debate, it's also changed because we have a different electoral system, so it actually reflects the votes that are cast. And that is also an improvement on that which went before. But there is so much more that we can learn from elsewhere, and that's one of the, to me, hugely exciting options that we have about governance in the broadest sense. By having a constitution, we can also work out, wider than Parliament, the involvement of society, and have society being the driving force of what is in that constitution. How do we want Scotland to look, and how we want to govern it? And that's over to you. You all have views. Can I endorse everything that Richard said about the Church of Scotland? I was with Reverend Lorna Hood last week in Bosnia, the moderator of the General Assembly, and she does a tremendous job, not just for people who happen to be members of the Church of Scotland, but across the faith community. And that's one of the other big differences since devolution, is that the interface between Civic Scotland and Decision-Making Scotland in Parliament is now much, much closer. There's a very, very close working relationship between all of the interest groups and our decision-making process, and that has to be a good thing. And with the full powers, the normal powers of independence, it means we can do it with everything else. Do I think we would ever have had a bedroom tax in Scotland? It's a disgrace, hitting the poorest, the disabled in our society. I do not think in a month of Sundays that would have passed in a Scottish Parliament, able to make decisions about welfare. The question about youth involvement, yes, Young Moray is going to be launched within the next month, so please come and speak to me if you're wanting to be involved. You'd be very welcome. We need to do more, we always need to do more, but we've got a lot of people who are younger who are wanting to be active, and we're going to set up a specific part of the Yes campaign in Moray to do that. At the present time we have an umbrella organisation that covers the whole of Moray, and then we have local groups in different parts of our home area, but we're also looking at young people for independence, women for independence, and we've got a very vibrant support amongst the business community locally, and that's also organising for people who are on the wealth creation side of things, who are wanting to get together and ensure we have a yes vote. So please come and speak to me at the end of the meeting if you want. Thank you.
Okay, so can we get a show of hands for some ladies with a couple of questions? Any ladies? There we go.
Angus, you said we can have a rule book to outline the way we are governed. Did you mean we will have a rule book?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, that's a quick question. I like that. Any ladies? Any other questions? No ladies. Okay, the gentleman in the front here has another question. Yeah, the gentleman just in the grey sweater.
Yeah, I'll do that.
Oh yeah, thanks. You mentioned just now about the youth. I wanted to talk. You mentioned actually the youth, and you're setting up the various organisations. Where are they going to go when the local authorities is closing down the halls, the libraries, and where are these? That's whereabout they're being held now. So where are they going to go now?
Okay, question on community resources. And do we have one more question, seeing as the first one was a quick answer? Gentleman just across the side, keep you fit, James.
Speaking of that, yeah.
Can I ask you how Scotland, as an independent country, would defend itself, and what kind of arrangements would be made for defence?
Okay, a question on defence. Thanks.
The issue of community facilities in Moray is a huge one, for obvious reasons. We've all lost facilities from our local communities due to decisions taken by the local authority. Even as a Conservative independent administration in the council, I have a lot of sympathy, as you can imagine, with their financial predicament. I don't agree with all the decisions of the local authority in terms of what's been closing. The libraries, etc., I think was the wrong decision, and some of the arts budget being eliminated was a disaster. However, I do recognise that the Moray Council has got some financial difficulties. Now, am I standing up here and making a political point about that? Well, yes, I am, and I have to be absolutely frank, because I'm a Scottish minister. So our budget at the Scottish Government level was cut by 27% by the UK Government. 27%. There's enough money for Trident, nuclear weapons, weapons of mass destruction, lots of money for these things down south, and decisions taken in Westminster, but not enough money for the Scottish budget or other important issues in society. Therefore, these decisions taken against the wishes of Scotland, have a direct impact in local community facilities in Moray. Because the block of money we get from Westminster, which we cannot influence under devolution, it's a cake. We've got to divvy up the cake. We can't change the size of the cake, so we've got no powers. No powers over tax or revenue raising, other than the 5%, which is mainly the council tax. Smaller budget to Scotland means we can't deliver the right budgets at local level to local authorities. So even though we've done our best to protect the budgets at local level, still get the same share of the overall cake. The cake, of course, is smaller, it's not getting bigger. And therefore, when local authorities have to take decisions of closing local facilities, sometimes, as I said, they get the wrong decisions, but the reason why they have to take these difficult decisions is because the wealth we have in this country goes to the UK government and